welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing two movies starring Jason, different Jasons, but there's some interesting parallels you can make between the two. One does some things really interestingly and well, and the other one does them really dully and bad. I saw these two movies at my local cinema. There's a cinema called the Village Werribee, which is a big cinema complex attached to a shopping centre. The shopping centre is going to be undergoing renovations in February, and so the cinema is not going to be there for the rest of the year. And this isn't the first time it's happened. The cinema was originally built in the 1990s as a part of the shopping centre, and then about 8 years ago it was emptied out and renovated as a part of a larger renovation of the shopping centre, and that's happening again. So even though it was only 8 years old, the Village Werribee was a little bit old-fashioned. None of the seats reclined except in the gold class posh area, and the cinemas themselves were showing a bit of wear and tear from constant people coming in and out and seeing things. We've been going there for over 20 years now. We went there when we had the original cinemas, when they did the renovation, and we're probably going to go there when they fix it up and redo it and hopefully have reclining seats. And given that history that I've got with the cinema, I thought it might be a nice thing to go there, see a couple of last movies before they close it down in February, and just wait it out until they redo it, reopen it, and hopefully give me a much more smooth and comfortable cinema experience than we'd be getting lately from that cinema. So I'm going to tell you about the movies in reverse order, and I'm going to tell you the one that did things really badly first. Now, as long-term viewers of the channel know, I'm a sucker for superhero movies. I'll go and see any superhero movie. I'll give anything a go. And I've been watching all of the Marvel ones, I've been watching all the DC ones, and the last of the old school DC EU movies came out, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, starring Jason Momoa. And I thought I'd give it a go, so I took my little press pass down to the cinema and watched the movie. This movie does everything wrong. This movie is, for me at least, and maybe I'm implying things that aren't true from the filmmaker's viewpoints, it's a very cynical exercise. It does so many things wrong. In fact, it destroys the franchise in four really crucial ways. Now, when I say franchise, I just mean Aquaman as an intellectual property, not the whole DCEU. That will be a much longer video where I to dissect that particular corpse. The first Aquaman movie came out in 2018, in November, and it hit a sweet spot in the emotional arc of superhero movie fans. It came out about 6 months after Avengers Infinity War, where we got the Thanos snap and half of the characters died, and we were left with that cliffhanger that wouldn't be resolved for another year. And people were shocked by it. There was a profound social impact on Avengers Infinity War, and that was of course at the stage where people were very engaged with these superhero movies. That one was, this is serious, we're taking this one seriously, we've had a big long arc leading up to this crisis point, and we don't know what's going on for a year, and it's a very bleak, dark and quite shocking ending for the time. And then 6 months later, a much lighter thing came out from the opposition team in Aquaman, with Jason Momoa and Amber Heard and Tamara Morrison and Nicole Kidman. And that did gangbuster business because people were nostalgic for a lighter kind of superhero movie right at that crisis point of the superhero movie loving in the world. Aquaman did crazy business. It did really well. James Wan did a great job directing it. The action scenes are crisp and precise. The world building worked, and the world building was given time to work. The movie ran 143 minutes and gave us time to understand the movie, to understand the world building, to understand the growing relationship between the characters. It gave us a whole origin story and a story of Aquaman fighting Black Manta and fighting a relationship with not only Mera, the woman that ultimately he would love and marry, but also his heritage as a half Atlantean. So all of that was done really well, and it took a movie of well over 2 hours to do that because you needed to build those worlds, and the special effects were for the most part on point. The action scenes were crisply done. It worked. So you zip forward 5 years and you get Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and it does a lot of things wrong. The first thing it does wrong is it doesn't understand, or at least doesn't acknowledge and build on, the things that made Aquaman work, which is giving us either a lighter thing or giving us something to differentiate it from the product that was coming out in 2023. Not that there was a hell of a lot of it from Marvel. It didn't really build on the goodwill the first movie had. And there are a number of reasons why it didn't. First off, the studio was tying off the loose ends of the old regime as far as the DC movies were concerned. James Gunn was coming in to work on rebuilding the franchise and rebuilding the intellectual property of DC in a cinematic and also a televisual way. And so the old school characters, who weren't all that old school really, like Aquaman, were on their end parts. Jason Momoa said he wanted to play Aquaman again, but it doesn't look like he's going to. So they're cutting loose the old Snyder era characters and the Snyder era actors and building something new, and that's fine. Franchises do that, particularly intellectual properties like this, which have the potential to rake in billions of dollars. And so the first thing that they do wrong to ruin the intellectual property and ruin the franchise of Aquaman is they don't understand and build on what worked in the first one. The second thing is a kind of social media thing, which is weird for me. They listen to the trolls. As the movie was in pre-production and in production, the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing happened. And there were literally 4 million people who signed a petition to get rid of Amber Heard from the Aquaman sequel, which shows that there are a lot of people with a lot of spare time on their hands, and there are a lot of people who ignore the egregious qualities of Johnny Depp as a human being to punish his ex-wife. I never liked Johnny Depp, I'll be honest with you. And given there is enough evidence there to suggest that he is a human coprolith, I'm not a fan of his in any way at all. There was a lot of money spent to create a perception that Amber Heard was a worse person than Johnny Depp, and that then leaked into the pre-production of Aquaman, and the studio started getting a little bit scared about it because money, or lack of money, and a threat to the cash flow is the only thing that scares a movie studio. So all of that came in, and they did a lot of reshoots, they did a lot of changes to the script to marginalise Aquaman's main squeeze in favour of a bromance between Aquaman and his estranged half-brother Orm, played by Patrick Wilson. The producer of the film, Peter Safran, said they wanted to give it a vibe like Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy in 48 Hours. It doesn't succeed in that at all. The Nick Nolte, Eddie Murphy vibe in 48 Hours is something special. And another superhero bromance is not particularly something that anybody was asking for or really needed. Having said that, Patrick Wilson does a good job of the acting. Jason Momoa does his usual macho Aquaman thing. And the wife gets marginalised, even though part of the movie's arc is about Arthur Curry's relationship with his newborn son. And that's where it gets even weirder. There's a scene where he's changing the baby's nappy, and the baby pisses in his mouth.
I must go punch that baby.
It happens. It's happened in a lot of movies. It's almost a cliche of a man changing a baby's nappy to have that baby, if it's a male baby, piss in the person's face. But this one, the kid pisses in his mouth because for some reason Jason Momoa keeps his mouth open. And then they do it 2 more times. It's like, okay, well, this is going to be a comedy. But that doesn't happen. Suddenly we get Black Manta, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen III. Coming back into the game, he's found some Atlantean technology that nobody knew about from a lost 7th kingdom of Atlantis. There's a special power source for that machinery called Orichalcum, not to be mistaken for the Seal of Orichalcos, which is something very different.
Now I activate the Seal of Orichalcos!
And a totally different intellectual property. And Orichalcum's a bad thing. It pollutes the atmosphere, it heats up the atmosphere, it causes mutation in things nearby, and we get a whole island nobody in the world knew about, where you get a few scenes of some very mutated plants and animals just to keep the action going in between the other action. which doesn't necessarily work because even the plants and animals that we see in this movie do exactly what you expect them to. A giant butterfly comes up to a plant and you know the plant's going to eat the butterfly, and sure enough it does. This movie is full of cliches and the obvious. Now I'm not going to do too much of the plot of this movie, but I am going to make a couple more observations about it. First off, I like needle drops in movies ever since Tarantino first resurged them in Pulp Fiction, amongst other films. When you get a song dropping into an action scene and the song plays very well with the action and it's the right moment for that song to appear and the song in some way relates to what's going on screen. Of course, you can play against that trap the way they did with Stuck in the Middle with You in Reservoir Dogs, where the dancing around of Michael Madsen's character is exactly the opposite of the poppy, upbeat music that's playing. But in this one, they go for the cliche. They go for the most obvious needle drops possible. For a start, they do Born to be Wild in an action scene, which has only been done 15 or 20 times before. And then for no good reason, and it does actually relate to the action you see on screen, they do Spirit in the Sky. And you go, yeah, if I was going to pick cliches, they would be the two cliches. One of the lovely things about a great needle drop in a TV series or a movie is that it introduces people to new music. And it also gives us the perfect song to put into a scene, to lift that scene and recontextualize it. It happens a bit in some TV series. It happened a lot in the Black Lightning TV series, where they got some Motown music that was used in various action scenes during Black Lightning, which really lifted it and also introduced people to a lot of the back catalogue of Motown and Stax records, so that black culture was highlighted in the series. But in this, it's cliched as hell. And it annoyed me enormously while I was watching it. And I could hardly believe they were going with those two obvious things. The only thing they didn't do is All Along the Watchtower with Jimi Hendrix. That would have been the third cliche, but they didn't go there. It's lazy filmmaking. And that's my fourth point. Third point, laziness. So the first thing we got is not understanding or using the strengths of the original movie. Second one was listening to the trolls. Third one is laziness. And the laziness continues in this movie. All the character beats we get in this film, where Aquaman goes up against Black Manta again, and goes up against an even bigger bad, which is the Undead King of the Seventh Kingdom, who was basically a special effect. James Wan and Peter Safran, being the director and the producer, decide they're going to pinch things from better movies. All of the bad guys who are on the side of Black Manta who are running his operation to refine this orichalcum and use it to power up the previously hidden Atlantean weapons that he's acquired, are all dressed up like the crew on the spaceships in Planet of the Vampires, the Mario Bava movie from 1965. The costumes are almost perfect examples of that, with a few embellishments. And the director and the producer admitted that they borrowed from Planet of the Vampires rather than getting something original. They also have a scene set in a desert where Arthur goes to rescue his brother Orm, and there are a whole bunch of kind of vampiric, mummy-like creatures who have been living in the desert for hundreds of years. And this is supposed to be an homage to the stop-motion animation of Ray Harryhausen in movies like Jason and the Argonauts and some of the Sinbad movies. And one of the things it does really badly is the action is so kinetic and so choppy in the edit and almost shaky cam at times that you don't get very clear views of these creatures as they start attacking Arthur and start attacking Orm as they try to escape to the ocean. If it was supposed to be an homage to Harryhausen, Harryhausen's stop-motion creatures had characters of their own. Even if it was Guanji, an Allosaurus, or even if it was the Ymir or something like that, there are always little bits of physical motion that gave those monsters character. And you don't get that in this. You get the kind of slightly reminiscent look of them, but you don't get anything that really informs the actions or the character of these monsters. They're just there basically to scare the heroes for a little bit and to give us another kinetic action scene leading into the next kinetic action scene or the next character beat, which is a cliche. One of the other things too about the laziness is, and this isn't in any way a criticism of the special effects people, some of the special effects is crap. There's that special effect they use when people are doing talking head stuff under the water, where the hair on all of the characters moves, and there are little bits of minor head movement that you see from a couple of the characters, one of whom's played by Dolph Lundgren, King Nereus. And watch his character particularly if you go and see this movie, or even see it on a streaming service. The hair doesn't move quite the same way as his head does, and the special effects on that are really bad. The tracking on them is appalling, and it draws attention to itself. Now, I'm not saying it's laziness on the part of special effects people. They were probably working 18-hour days to get the stuff done. This is an incredibly special effects heavy movie, but it draws attention to itself, and there may have been other ways of doing it where you didn't have to have those special effects. You could have got them in an air bubble to have the discussion or something like that. And you could have thought of a reason to do that, and it may have worked a lot better. But special effects that draw attention to themselves as special effects draw you out of the story. Again, it's that laziness. So all of the laziness is the crappy needle drops, the use of other movies' ideas and other movies' aesthetics because you can't be bothered thinking up something yourself, the ropey special effects, and the predictable plot beats and character beats. And all of that leads to the fourth point, which is disrespecting the audience. Yes, there are going to be welded-on superhero movie fans that go to see the movie and who uncritically watch it and just want to get their jollies from the zoom, zoom, punch, punch. But it's still disrespectful. These people are paying their money to see these things. And when the laziness and the boring, cliched, and obvious product that you presented is disrespectful to the audience. And again, they don't give it time to develop as well. This one is 20 to 30 minutes shorter than the first movie because they really didn't have anything useful to fill that time with. Now, William Goldman, the great William Goldman, one of the great screenwriters of the 20th century, said there are three kinds of movies. There's the movies that would try to be good and succeed, the movies that try to be good and fail, and the movies that were never meant to be good at all. They were just meant to be cash cows. And Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is the third kind. It was never meant to be good. It was meant to make some money. It was meant to fulfill contractual obligations. It was meant to be a sequel and to fill a slot in a particular schedule for release. And yeah, the movie's making money. It's not making great money. First movie made almost 1.2 billion. And this is going to be lucky to crack 500 million. And it annoyed the hell out of me because of that. I think that those four things really kill a movie and kill the intellectual property upon which the movie is based. And it annoyed the shit out of me. I was really unhappy when I left that cinema having watched that movie, and I understand why it hasn't got as much money as the first one and why it's a kind of wet fart to end this particular period of the DCEU. That then takes me to the second movie, again starring a Jason, in this case Jason Statham, and it's a little movie from 2024 called The Beekeeper, which is a pretty good kick-ass action flick. I like it. It's got it has a certain legacy to John Wick in one way, and I'll discuss that in a moment. But if you're going to watch a movie with a Jason in it, you're not going to go and see the Aquaman one, you're going to see The Beekeeper. And I'm going to tell you why. It was directed by David Ayer, who has a connection to DC because he did the first Suicide Squad movie, which was poorly regarded. But I don't think that the low quality of the first Suicide Squad movie was directly down to David Ayer. He's a good action director. He knows what he's doing. He knows where to put the camera. He knows how to do it. And he knows how to frame an action scene. And it was written by Kurt Wimmer. Kurt Wimmer did a movie from about 20 years ago that was really underrated, I think called Equilibrium, with Christian Bale, which is set in a dystopian future and has that gun kata thing, which is basically kung fu with guns. And it worked as a pretty interesting action film. Very striking visuals, Interesting world building, not the best science fiction or even action film in the world, but it was an honest effort. And so is this one. And this gives us mid-career Jason Statham. He's now 56 years old. He's not a young rooster anymore. And it gives us the possibility of a new franchise for Statham. Statham's been in a lot of franchises. Of course, he's been in the Fast and Furious movies. He did the Transporter movies. He did the 2 Crank movies. And a couple of others. He did the Mechanic reboot, 2 movies of that. So Jason Statham, and also the 2 Meg movies. So Jason Statham is the king of the 2 movie series. And The Beekeeper's got potential to be a franchise. I think it's an interesting one, in the same way The Equalizer is an interesting one. And this one actually does some interesting things in that it looks at a current social problem and puts it into the context of an action film. Statham plays a guy called Adam Clay, who's retired and lives in a shed attached to a farm owned by an older woman, and he keeps bees.
You're a blessing, Mr. Clay. This place was crabgrass and weeds, and you brought it back to life.
And he makes honey and sells honey. That's his passion. That's what he does. The older woman is played by Felicia Rashad, who was Claire Huxtable in The Cosby Show. And she's a retired teacher who has a daughter who's an FBI agent. And she gets a virus on her computer. And a little screen pops up telling her to call a certain number to get this virus fixed. Of course, it's a scam. And we see some interesting beats as the guy on the end of the phone, who is a total wanker, talks us through how to fix this problem and gives us the way phishing scams actually work. The movie tells us all the little things that phishers do to con people out of their savings and to empty out their bank accounts and to rip off vulnerable, particularly older people. And the guy cons her expertly in a room full of people watching him do this because he's the training lead. He's showing everybody else how to do this. And they empty out her bank accounts. They empty out all of her savings. They empty out a charity account that she's a signatory on of a couple of $1 million. And then the guy hangs up. And the woman, whose name is Eloise Parker, realizes she's been ripped off and realizes the money is gone. And there's nothing she can do about it. And she ends her own life. Her daughter comes back, and they find that there's this weird older guy living on the farm, and he gets arrested. Adam Clay gets arrested. The daughter, played by Emmy Raver Lampman, is a FBI agent called Verona Parker. And she is a loose cannon in her own way, and her character gets a lot of character development in this. And Statham's character is stoic as hell. He's a beekeeper, and he gets arrested by the cops. They find out that he doesn't have any gun residue on his hands and that Eloise has self-terminated, and so they let him go. Meanwhile, the guy who runs the company that was ripping her off is a very wealthy man whose mother is even wealthier and more powerful, a guy called Derek Danforth, played by Josh Hutcherson. And Josh Hutcherson does a really interesting thing in this. He plays a character like the infamous YouTube scam artist Logan Paul. His character is a Logan Paul equivalent, and he runs the company that runs the call centers that do this kind of rip-off. In real life, those call centers are mostly in India, but for the sake of this story, they're in America. Adam Clay is a beekeeper, but he is also the beekeeper, which is a special kind of agent that looks after the US. He protects the hive. He protects society from people within or without that try to threaten it. He is the John Wick of secret agents, and that's where the parallels come in with John Wick. He finds out where the call center that ripped her off is, walks in there with 2 jerry cans full of petrol, and destroys the place.
I'm gonna burn this place to the ground.
The security guards try to stop him, but he goes through them like a knife through butter. And the action scenes are very crisp in this, and there is a lot of originality to the action scenes in this film. They're not quite on the level of a John Wick movie, but they're acceptably good. And then Adam Clay goes up the chain to find the source of all of these problems. And that source of the problems is Derek Danforth. Now, Danforth's got protection. The former head of the CIA, a guy called Westwild, played by Jeremy Irons, has Derek's back because of his mother's position. And he sends out people to try to stop Adam Clay. But he knows what a beekeeper is. And he knows that the beekeepers are singular individuals and at above government level of protection for the United States. Calls in some favours. He talks to the person in charge of the beekeepers, played by Minnie Driver, who has a couple of really nice scenes in this. And they send out the new beekeeper because Adam Clay is retired, and they send out his replacement. Adam Clay slowly works his way up to finding Derek and stopping him against insurmountable odds. And this works. Now, I'm going to tell you why it works. First off, the action's great. Statham is good in this. The action scenes are original and well done. The world building is great. One of the great strengths of the John Wick series is building the world within which John Wick operates. And this movie does the same thing in a totally different world. The world of the beekeepers is an interesting one. And the parallels between beekeeping, where sometimes you've got to take out the queen to protect the hive, and sometimes the queen is producing non-viable offspring and you've got to take things out from that. The parallels work, and the beekeeping analogy is very strong, and it's a very interesting one too. And in fact, Statham actually uses a jar of honey in a very interesting way in one of the action scenes. The movie isn't the best action film in the world, but it's honest. It does what it says it's going to do. It builds the world. It keeps you engaged. It gives you characters who have meaning and who have viability and who aren't necessarily predictable. Verona Parker, the FBI agent, isn't in the mainstream of things, but as the threat escalates, she is given more and more resources to try to stop Adam Clay and to stop what's going on, and also to investigate these very dodgy businesses that Derek is running. And so she gets escalated by this, even though she is very much an outsider within the FBI. And so all of these characters work well and work towards an interesting climax of the film. And the movie stops dead right at the climax. There's no post-credit sequence. It just goes chop, bang, end. And I like that, even though there is very much a possibility for a sequel to this film, which I hope happens. And again, comparing the two Jason movies, the honesty of a movie like The Beekeeper is a breath of fresh air after seeing the Aquaman movie. The Aquaman movie is a cynical money grab, whereas the Beekeeper movie has the real intention of entertaining the audience. And the audience is always in the front of mind when they were making this movie, the way it's put together, the way it's formed, the world it builds, the acting, the characters, the lot. It's an honest action film, and I enjoyed it beyond its qualities. This is where we are with cinema in 2023-24. Cynical exercises versus honest world building and honest attempts to entertain an audience. And I think that's a lot of fun. This isn't necessarily the normal stuff I do for Science Fiction Saturday, but you can argue that Aquaman is science fiction. But it was just interesting comparing and contrasting those two movies and seeing the last two movies in the current iteration of my local cinema. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, watch some of the playlists, because there are a lot of movies on this playlist and a lot of videos about movies on those playlists. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got a couple of things lined up for the Monday video, which are going to be a bit of fun. And then, of course, we roll into the midweek video and then Science Fiction Saturday again next week. And until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some honest action films with a lot of entertainment value that are just a little bit different, but still a lot of fun. And I'll catch you next time.